Before the story begins, make sure to like, subscribe, and let me know. What time do you usually watch videos? And don't forget to suggest the next story or content you'd like to see. Story 1: The Closet That Answered at Night. When I was 13, my family moved into an old rental house in a quiet neighborhood. It was nothing extraordinary, just a two-story home with peeling white paint and a creaky porch that my father promised he'd fix, but never did. The house had that faint smell of mildew and old wood, the kind that clings to your clothes when you stay inside too long. My room was upstairs, right at the end of the narrow hallway, and though I had begged for the larger room with the big window overlooking the street, my parents gave that one to my younger sister. At first, I thought I'd gotten the worst deal. My room was smaller, with slanted ceilings and a single narrow window that looked out onto the side of the neighbor's house. But there was something about it that unsettled me. Something I couldn't put my finger on. The closet, maybe. It was an old, shallow closet with a wooden door painted the same dull white as the walls. The knob was tarnished brass, cool to the touch, and it stuck slightly when you tried to turn it. Inside, the space was too small to be useful. The walls were stained with faint, dark streaks, and there was a strange indentation in the floorboards at the back, like something heavy had once been dragged across them. My mom joked it was the perfect spooky closet, and my sister dared me to sleep with the door open. I refused. The first few weeks passed without incident, though I never liked being in that room alone. At night, the house groaned and shifted like old houses do, but one sound stood out above all the others: a steady knock. At first, I thought it came from the wall, maybe the pipes, but when I pressed my ear to the plaster, I realized it was coming from inside the closet. It wasn't loud, more like a patient tap, deliberate tap, 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 as though someone inside was knocking just to remind me they were there. I told my parents, but they brushed it off. "It's probably the wood settling," my dad said. "Old houses make all kinds of noises." My mom laughed and said, "Maybe it's your closet monster saying hello." My sister thought it was hilarious and started teasing me, knocking on the walls outside my door at night just to freak me out. But it wasn't funny to me. One night, around 2 in the morning, I woke up suddenly. I wasn't sure why at first, until I realized the knocking had changed. Instead of the slow, steady taps, it was faster now, insistent. 3 knocks in quick succession, pause, then 3 more. My heart pounded as I sat up, staring at the closet door in the dim moonlight filtering through the window. And then, against all reason, I knocked back. I don't know why I did it. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe some strange part of me wanted to prove it was just the pipes or my imagination. I lifted my hand and tapped 3 times against the headboard of my bed. For a moment, silence hung heavy in the room. And then, 3 knocks answered from inside the closet. I froze. My breath caught in my throat, and I pulled the covers up around me, too terrified to move. The knocks didn't come again that night, but I didn't sleep either. The next morning, I tried to tell my mom, but the look she gave me told me she thought I was being dramatic. My dad gave me a half smile, clearly humoring me, and told me not to feed the fear. But my sister, she just smirked and whispered, "Maybe it likes you." Over the next few weeks, the knocking became routine. Always at night, always from inside the closet. Sometimes it was the steady tapping. Other times it was in patterns, like it was responding to me. Once, when I whispered hello into the dark, I swear I heard the faintest knock in return. I started sleeping with my lamp on, but even that didn't help. The light only seemed to make the shadows around the closet deeper, thicker somehow, like the door was absorbing it. I stopped sleeping altogether most nights, lying awake, waiting for the sound, and it always came. One night I decided to be brave. I don't know what possessed me, but I got out of bed, walked across the creaky floor, and stood in front of the closet. The knocking had been going on for nearly an hour, soft but steady, and my nerves were frayed. I wrapped my hand around the brass knob and hesitated. Then I turned it. The door swung open with a groan, revealing the shallow, shadowed interior. Just clothes hanging limply, the floorboards scarred and uneven. The knocking stopped instantly. My pulse raced as I stepped closer, pushing aside the clothes to press my hand against the back wall. Nothing, just cold wood. I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it, until I pulled my hand away and saw the faint outline of 3 small, perfect circles burned into the wood where my palm had been. After that night, things escalated. The knocking grew louder, more aggressive. Sometimes it would start in the middle of the day, faint but audible, even when others were around. Once, during dinner, I swore I heard it echoing faintly through the floorboards beneath my chair, as if the closet's presence was bleeding into the rest of the house. I begged my parents to let me switch rooms with my sister, but they refused. "Don't let your imagination win," my dad said. But he didn't sleep in that room. He didn't wake up at 3 a.m. to hear frantic pounding from the other side of the closet door, like fists slamming against the wood. The worst night came in late autumn, when the air was sharp and the trees outside were bare. I woke to the sound of the closet door creaking open on its own. My lamp was still on, casting a pale circle of light across the room, and I watched in horror as the door slowly swung wide. The knocking didn't come this time. Instead, there was silence, thick and pressing. And then, movement. The hangers inside swayed as though something unseen brushed past them. The shadows seemed to stretch, spilling out across the floor like black water. I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. I just sat there, paralyzed, as the darkness spread closer to my bed. And then, just as suddenly, the closet door slammed shut with a deafening crack. The lamp flickered and went out. When I woke the next morning, the closet door was wide open again. My clothes were on the floor in a heap, and the inside walls were covered in scratches, long, jagged gouges that hadn't been there before. We moved out of that house a few months later. My parents never admitted that they'd heard the knocking, but I caught my mom looking pale and uneasy whenever I mentioned it. And once, late at night, I overheard my dad whispering to her, "It's not just the house." It was answering him. To this day, I can't sleep with a closet door open. And sometimes in the quiet of the night, when the house is still, I swear I hear it again, the faint, deliberate knock, waiting for me to answer. Story 2, the knocking inside the hotel walls. I had always been skeptical of ghost stories, the kind of tales people swapped at bars late into the night, always insisting that something had happened to them. I chalked it up to nerves, bad lighting, or an overactive imagination. That was before the business trip that landed me in the cold, unassuming town of Marrow Creek, and in a hotel that has haunted my dreams ever since. The hotel was not one of those roadside chains you could trust for bland consistency. It was old, its brickwork worn by decades of weather, its carved wooden sign faded and barely legible. The building sat oddly at the end of a long street, pressed up against what used to be an empty lot, now just a shadowed pit fenced off with rusting iron. My colleague had made the booking for me, saying everything else in town was full. I told myself it was just a bed for the night. The lobby was quiet when I arrived. The walls were lined with portraits of unsmiling men and women whose eyes seemed to follow me. A pale woman at the front desk checked me in without much conversation, her voice raspy as though she hadn't used it in weeks. My room was on the 3rd floor, at the far end of a narrow hallway. The carpet muffled my steps, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being swallowed by silence. When I first entered the room, I felt a brief wave of relief. It was simple: a bed, a desk, a single chair, and a window with heavy curtains. But there was something odd about the layout. The walls seemed too thick, as though there was wasted space behind them. The wallpaper had a repeating floral pattern that looked aged and yellowed, curling at the corners. I ignored the strange geometry of the room and unpacked. It was around midnight when I first heard the knocking. I was sitting at the desk, reading through notes for the meeting I had the next morning, when a hollow tap, tap, tap came from the wall behind me. I froze, listening. The sound was rhythmic, deliberate. 3 knocks, a pause, then 3 more. It came from the wall just behind the headboard of the bed. I stood up and pressed my ear to the wallpaper. The knocks came again, louder this time, and so close it made my breath catch. I knocked back 3 times. To my shock, an immediate response came: 3 sharp knocks, perfectly mimicking mine. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe there was another guest in the next room, messing around. I left the room, walked down the hallway, and checked the numbers. My room, 312, sat at the very end of the hall. The wall my bed rested against didn't back onto another room. It was the outer wall of the building. I returned, unsettled, and tried to sleep. But the knocking continued. Sometimes it was faint, like someone gently rapping their knuckles. Other times it was violent, a pounding that shook the headboard. I buried myself under the blankets and told myself I was imagining it. At 3:17 a.m., I woke to silence. But the air in the room felt heavy, as though thick with humidity, though the heater was off. I sat up, my ears straining. Then, without warning, a series of frantic knocks erupted, so fast and loud that the headboard rattled against the wall. My heart leapt into my throat. I whispered, "Who's there?" My voice trembled, the knocking stopped. Then, slowly, it resumed, one knock at a time. Not random, not meaningless. It was spelling something. I counted, my skin crawling as I realized it was Morse code. I didn't know much, but I remembered the basics. 3 short knocks, 3 long, 3 short again. SOS. I scrambled out of bed, adrenaline rushing. My phone was on the desk, and I quickly pulled up Morse code charts. The knocks continued, spelling words with pauses between them. Help. Trapped. Inside. Inside what? Inside where? I was alone in this room, or at least I thought I was. I pressed my hand against the wallpaper. It was vibrating slightly with each knock, as if something or someone was right behind it. The idea of a crawl space or a hidden room formed in my mind, and suddenly I remembered the odd thickness of the walls. I tried to peel the wallpaper back. The old glue resisted, but I managed to tear a strip, revealing plaster beneath. I knocked hard. The response was immediate, frantic. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my bag, shoved my things inside, and ran. As I passed the front desk, the woman looked up. For the first time, she smiled. Her lips were thin and cracked, but her expression was strangely knowing. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked softly. I stammered something about leaving early, about catching a train. She nodded, as though this was routine, as though she had seen it before. The next morning, I mentioned the knocking to a local shopkeeper. His face paled immediately. He told me the hotel was built in the 1920s, and during renovations years ago, they discovered walled-off crawl spaces where drifters and transients had once been hidden away. Some were found dead inside, long after anyone had forgotten they were there. I didn't go back to the hotel to confirm, but I can still hear the sound sometimes, when I close my eyes. The sharp rhythm of knuckles striking wood, pleading to be heard. The memory makes me wonder if someone is still there, forever pounding on the walls of that room, desperate for someone to let them out. Story 3, the child's toy chest that wouldn't stay silent. When I was a child, there was a wooden toy chest that sat at the foot of my bed. It had been in the family for years, long before I was born. My mother used to tell me it had belonged to her when she was a little girl, and before that, to her mother. By the time it made its way into my room, it looked tired but sturdy. Oak wood, heavy brass hinges, and a carved lid with faded floral patterns. Inside, it smelled faintly of cedar, as if it had been holding secrets longer than it had been holding toys. I used to love it, at least until it started making sounds. The first time it happened, I was 7 years old. It was the middle of the night, and I woke up because I thought I heard something tapping against my bedroom wall. I sat up, blinked in the darkness, and listened. The sound wasn't coming from the wall at all. It was coming from inside the toy chest. A soft, deliberate knock. At first, I thought maybe a toy had shifted. Maybe the weight of something inside was pressing against the lid. I tried to go back to sleep, but then it knocked again. This time, harder. 3 slow, distinct raps from the inside of the chest. I remember pulling my blanket up to my chin and whispering, "Stop it." But the chest knocked one more time, almost as if it were answering me. The next morning, I told my mom. She laughed, told me I'd had a nightmare, and suggested maybe I had mice in my room. She opened the chest in front of me, pulling out dolls, plastic cars, and a pile of stuffed animals. No mice, no sign of anything unusual. But the knocking didn't stop. Every few nights, it would come back. Sometimes a single knock, other times a long series of them, like someone was trapped inside and wanted out. I got so used to the sound that I stopped sleeping well. I'd lie awake, staring at the chest, waiting for it to start again. It always did. Things escalated one weekend when my cousin Lily came to stay. We shared my bed, whispering in the dark long after my parents went to sleep. Just as Lily started to drift off, the toy chest knocked. She bolted upright, eyes wide. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. I nodded, my throat dry. We both stared at the chest. Another knock, then another. Lily gasped, grabbed my hand, and whispered, "Who's in there?" Neither of us dared to open it. We spent the rest of the night wide awake, clutching each other and staring until dawn. The next morning, I begged my mom to take the chest out of my room. I told her Lily had heard it too. She sighed, annoyed at what she thought was our shared imagination, but finally agreed to put it in the attic. For a while, I thought the nightmare was over, but it wasn't. The attic was directly above my room. At night, I could still hear the knocks, muffled now, but still there. Worse, sometimes it wasn't just knocking. Sometimes it sounded like the lid creaked open, a dragging noise, a faint thud, like something heavy shifting around. One night, when the sound was particularly loud, I climbed up to the attic with a flashlight. My parents were asleep, and I was tired of being afraid. The air in the attic was thick with dust, the kind that clings to your skin and makes you cough. The toy chest sat in the corner, its carved lid closed tight. I approached slowly, shining the light on it. For a moment, nothing happened, just silence. Then, 3 knocks, loud from the inside. I jumped back, nearly dropping the flashlight. And then, without me touching it, the lid lifted just a crack, enough to release a long, slow sigh, as if the chest itself was exhaling. The flashlight flickered, and I ran. I bolted down the attic stairs and didn't stop until I was back under my covers. After that night, I refused to go near the attic. I begged my parents again, and eventually my dad carried the chest to the garage. He said he'd deal with it later, but it stayed there for years, gathering dust in the farthest corner. I thought maybe that would be the end of it. But years later, when I was a teenager, I had to go into the garage to grab some boxes. I hadn't thought about the chest in a long time, but there it was, buried under old tarps and cardboard. The sight of it made my stomach turn. I almost walked away, but then I heard it. Knock, soft but clear. The chest shifted under the tarp, as if it had been waiting. This time, curiosity got the better of me. I pulled the tarp back, crouched down, and pressed my ear against the wood. At first, all I heard was silence. Then, another knock. And then, a faint sound that froze me in place. A child's giggle. I fell back, scrambled to my feet, and ran out of the garage. I told myself I'd imagined it, but I couldn't ignore the truth. I had grown up, but whatever lived inside that chest hadn't. To this day, the toy chest still sits in my parents' garage. My dad jokes about throwing it away, but he never does. Maybe he feels the same unexplainable pull I do, that if you throw it away, it won't stay gone. Sometimes when I visit, I hear it again. A knock, faint but deliberate, always when no one else is around. And once, only once, I thought I heard something worse. A voice, high-pitched like a child's. It whispered, just barely audible through the wood, "Let me out." Maybe the sound came from a closet, from the walls, or from a toy that should have stayed quiet. Yet the truth is far stranger than any explanation will ever have. Some knocks are warnings, some are invitations, and some are just waiting for you to answer.